Well, I think I've seen this movie before. We've seen it happen all around the country, but today's show is going to talk about something that we're seeing happening in the state of Ohio, and that is that when you introduce a form of legalized gambling in a state, it seems like the biggest addicts in the state become the state lawmakers. They become the biggest addicts, and they prove time and time again that the most powerful lobbying force in many of these states is, in fact, the gambling industry.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Welcome to the Public Square.
Ohio's on a path to legalize iLottery and iGambling, in essence, casino games at your fingertips on your phone. That's the bill that's been introduced.
They're really calling it iLottery. Is that the legal term, or is that just the nomenclature for the industry?
I believe it's the legal term of a specific thing is the iLottery and iGaming and iGambling, and yeah, they get the I in front of everything.
Not to be confused with iVoters.
I was going to say, here we go again with copyright and trademark questions.
Well, there's going to be plenty of them, but here it is. It pops once again. Groundhog Day. Here we go.
Well, let's talk about some background to all of this in regards to why should anyone care about what three guys in an online posting say about this. If you're brand new to the Public Square, then you should know that this product, this program, whatever you want to call this thing, the podcast, whatever, is the manifestation of 45 years of work in the arena of public policy, which is anchored in the Midwest at the American Mission Center in Valley City, Ohio, and then emanates from the Great Lakes to the Florida Keys, and from that network channel of offices from Orlando to Nashville to Cleveland emanates out across the country and goes coast to coast through our radio broadcast, The Public Square, which is heard now on getting close to 300 stations, and all these other additional online venues by which you might be plugging in or connecting to us. So we've been at this for a while in regards to public policy. Now, most of us don't look that old. I do, but we've been at this for a long time. The issue of gambling as a matter of public policy first crossed our frame of reference in 1988 when we began to look at legislation that was coming into the states to expand horse racing. That's where the whole thing began, in the whole concept of how the racing industry, the horse racing industry, managed to get around so many legal barriers to begin to crawl into state law and open and expand operations. So this goes back to 1988 in regards to legislation in the states. Now, this was before anyone really envisioned the casino industry coming along and doing what they've done. And then we have lived through all of the different variations through the original idea of Vegas becoming Atlantic City, then Atlantic City becoming stationary riverboats, and riverboats that went to nowhere, then riverboat casinos coming into land-based casinos, and then the transmission over into electronic distribution of gambling and state lotteries getting involved in that process. And at the same time, we've also had plenty of legislative battles and court battles in this process, with lottery expansion and defrauding promises of the voters in regards to lottery funds being removed out of education. We've won some suits, we've lost some suits. And now we're to the level where I guess we call this iGambling, Rob, where we've now have the casino industry's ultimate goal, which has always been convenience gambling. And the casino industry has capitalized upon the technological developments that we've experienced in America to where now their goal is to place a casino in everybody's pocket. Through whatever electronic device you carry or hold, they want you to be able to gamble. Now, if you could imagine where we're going with some of these visual products, with the electronics that keep you connected to the internet at all times and all of that conversation, we could be to the place where people are literally carrying a casino in the frame of their glasses. And as they're riding on the bus or walking down the street or involved in any situation, sending messaging in to gamble on prop bets in regard to 5 baseball games at the same time, where the next pitch that's going to be thrown is a ball or a strike. I mean, there's almost no limit to now. And now there's almost no limit to the opportunities to wager consistently and persistently. So that's the expanse, and we have been around for all of it. Now, that's background to make one fundamental statement. From the beginning, we have acknowledged the fact that there is not a religious objection to this process that anchors it. In other words, you're not going to find the words, "thou shalt not gamble," in the Bible. What you'll find is a tremendous amount of conversation about the proper stewardship of wealth and time, all of which the gambling industry despises. And that's a pretty good case right there. But the case that we have made even over and above, or at least alongside that case of stewardship, is the fact that history proves that gambling and good government don't mix. We should probably, and we've got that statement copyrighted, we should probably try to trademark it right next to iGambling. Gambling and good government don't mix, because if you study the history of gambling in America, it always ends in devastation and corruption, and then people reject it and it becomes illegal again, because it is it's a plane that every time it resurfaces and launches, it is destined to crash. It's just a matter of time. So we have been watching this unfold since the early 90s across the country. And now, Rob, we're at the place where you think we've actually hit the point of saturation where they can, is this the last phase of expansion, do you think?
Oh, I don't know, but they're making the same arguments they've made for 30 some years. And it always seems to center on the illegal aspect of it. As I watched the sponsor testimony of this specific bill, it was the sponsor was talking about the billions of dollars that are illegally gambled and the willingness to capture them. The problem is, that's the same thing they said regarding brick and mortar casinos and why we should go there. That's the same thing they said on why VLT should be in racetracks. That's the same thing they said on why sports gambling should be on all of our phones. Every time it's the same argument. They need to come to the realization they're not going to capture all of the illegal dollars that are being gambled. It's just a reality. The same way they're not going to capture all the illegal weed money that's out there, even though there's marijuana on every street corner endorsed and sold basically by the government. It's not going to happen. So they need to come to a reality check.
I think it just goes to prove the point that gambling and good government don't mix, because now instead of talking about the human impact of these forms of public policy and this activity, and basically the question is it worth it? They're basically saying, no, we still want to capture the universe. So it's clear that the addicts are still chasing bad money, and the addicts are the politicians. So let's take a second and let's talk about this idea that gambling and good government don't mix. Surely this is it's a Democrat thing, right? I mean, this is just one more place of the progressive Democrat agenda. They just want to gamble, 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 and the righteous Republicans are standing against them, right?
No, this is a Republican idea. I was talking to someone today that was from New England that is a resident of the state of Ohio. They said, why don't I just go back to New England, where at least they're honest about wanting government in charge of everything. Ohio has abortion on demand, weed anywhere you want it, and gambling everywhere. And Republicans have been in control for as long as anyone can remember. Remind me again how that's a conservative state. And the state budget has exceeded the rate of inflation every year for, I believe, the last 20 years, with the exception of 4. So no, Dave, to answer your question, it's a Republican idea. The Republicans are always the one driving the bus, because the reality is the Republicans are the ones that make money off this. They're the ones that get paid to do this. What was interesting is to hear, in 2009, when Ohio approved 4 brick and mortar casinos via the state constitution, in essence, put Dan Gilbert, owner of the Cavaliers, and his friends' business plan regarding casino gambling in the state constitution. A lot of Republicans got paid on the back end for consulting, for ad buys, for the work that they did. And then 14 years later, when there was another issue on the state constitution, they pointed to the 2009 amendment and said, this is why we should amend the state constitution now, because the 2009 amendment was bad. We should never have done that. And I'm like, wait a minute, you guys all got paid on that deal.
Well, and the history on that as well, Rob, you well remember, and just again, in the spirit of full disclosure, not that we have anything to hide, but we want to have a lot more to talk about. Rob and I met in the very beginning at a hearing at the Ohio State House where he and his mom were testifying about the impact of casino gambling in your portion in East Liverpool, Ohio, and the impact that the West Virginia casino was having upon Ohio citizens. And Ohio was debating the idea of expanding into casino gambling. So we met you on the trail in regards to this particular issue. And maybe what we'll do one of these days is to do a broadcast where we simply discuss your story and how this impacted you. But holding that aside for the moment, that's where we met. We met in a legislative debate about this, and we were on the same side, and we were both testifying before the same committee. It's been a long time now. From '88, when the racetracks were trying to expand and were unable to do that, there were 4 statewide ballot issues starting in 1990, I believe it was, and then ending in 2009, where the gambling industry came to the Ohio voters 4 consecutive times and with different types of proposals to open casinos in Ohio. And the proposal was always to create a business plan for casino gambling and place it in the Ohio Constitution. And the reason for that is because Ohio, like many states, carried in its original Constitution of 1803 and 1850 bans against this style of gambling. In fact, it was a ban against everything, including the lottery. That's why in Ohio, they had a constitutional amendment to even start the Ohio lottery back in 1973. And that was highly controversial. And the reason that Ohio didn't want it was because Ohio was formed as a state in an era which had experienced so much abuse and so much corruption in regards to gambling. They didn't want to be any part of government because they knew it would corrupt the political processes. So we forgot that. By 1973, it was forgotten. And then the 4 campaigns came. Now, in those 4 campaigns, we had the privilege at the American Policy Roundtable to be parts of coalitions and oftentimes to lead those coalitions, working with the citizens for the defeat of casino gambling. So the industry would come, they would get the signatures paid for, and they'd get the ballot issue constructed, they'd put it on the ballot, and then they'd spend $10 million or $20 million or $30 million or $40 million to try to pass it. And we would put together a coalition and fight it from a citizen-based initiative and usually raise about $1 million or less. And by the merciful grace of God, and because there were a lot of very solid leaders in Ohio who had good reputations, like the late Governor and Senator George Voinovich, who joined us in that process, Attorney General Betty Montgomery, other people, these people were Republicans, and we also had Democrats that would stand with us. In particular, we had the pastoral community in the Black church that would stand with us. We had a very broad coalition of people who would say, no, we're not going to do this to ourselves. And the reason that they said that was because they recognized that gambling would corrupt our political processes, and because living on the ground, on the street, where people actually are destroyed by gambling, and knowing that the percentages of people who are being destroyed by gambling are rising, and that the more you expose people to convenience gambling, the more lives you will destroy, they said we shouldn't be in the business of government destroying lives. It just doesn't make sense. Well, 3 out of those 4 times, in spite of being outspent tens of millions to one, the people of Ohio rejected the casino industry. In 2009, everything changed because the former state party chairman of the Republican Party and a number of major political consultants, all Republicans, took big checks from the gambling industry. And they basically bought up all the law firms. They bought up all the opposition. They paid them all off. They ran it in an off election year. And they managed to squeak by and win their casino proposal. And Dan Gilbert and his friends got to put their addresses in the state constitution to have their exclusive monopoly on casinos. And the net effect of it has been, in regards to Ohio economy, jobs, et cetera, has been a total flat tire. Their promises haven't even remotely come true.
You help us think well on these issues, a listener of the Public Square recently wrote. We appreciate the compliment, but none of these conversations would be happening without the help of listeners just like you. Every day, good old regular people of all ages take a moment to send support to the Public Square. Giving is easy, safe, and secure. Just log on to thepublicsquare.com to find out how. Thank you for helping to spread the light of liberty across the land. Please stay tuned to the end of today's program for a special musical presentation from Nashville, Tennessee.
It passed in 2009, and that's after it was defeated in 2006 and 2008. And the reality of it is they were all bad proposals, but the 2006 proposal was far better than any of the other ones. It's just they, as you mentioned, they kept beating them down with tens of millions of dollars of false promises they never had to deliver on, and the fact it was an off election year.
And the gambling industry is corrupt as it can be. They buy politicians, and they own more Republicans than they own Democrats. And for people that believe that being a Republican is a symbol of virtue, we really need to check ourselves in the mirror, because the Republican Party is more addicted to the gambling industry than the Democrat Party by a long, long, long shot. In fact, you've got to recognize that Steve Wynn was the national treasurer of the Republican Party, the casino owner. The casino in Vegas, the casino owner from Macau, the late Sheldon Adelson, was the largest contributor to Republican candidates in America from the casino industry. And with all due respect to the current president, he's a former casino owner. Now, I can say former, so we can recognize maybe he's changed his opinion on that industry. All right, he's not in it any longer. But the truth of it is that the Republican Party is dramatically influenced. And in the state of Ohio, Rob, I think, how would you rank the Ohio legislative process and leadership in regards to the casino industry? Are they allies? We can see what's happened. Is it as bad as we think it is?
Well, there's a budget that's constitutionally due by June 30th, a biennial budget in the state of Ohio. And they took time, middle of May, to spend on a 700-page iLottery, iGaming bill. So the leadership could have squashed that. The leadership could have said, hey, we're not going to mess with that right now with everything that's going on. But they did it. So I would say, yes, they're in support, full support of this, because they're the biggest addicts there are. They think that money's coming. That's not.
Well, we keep throwing around the word addict and addicted and addiction. Do you both remember the documentary, The Social Dilemma?
Yeah.
You guys remember this documentary? We've talked about it before on the Public Square. Essentially, one of the main points that jumped to me about that documentary, because it was about social media, a lot of it primarily how social media apps are used on the phone. And they had scientists quoted in that documentary talking about the fact that they designed the apps specifically to addict people, to keep them on the platform, to keep them on the phone, to keep them locked in and coming back and receiving genuine dopamine hits. Mm-hmm. Features like pull to refresh, which you see on X, where you pull down the content that you're reading and brand new stuff pops right back up. So I'm just thinking about how uniquely addictive this iGaming has the potential to be. Like a casino almost sounds quaint and old fashioned. That sounds like a riverboat now. You have to literally walk to a brick and mortar casino and go in it. You have to put on clothes and go to a place and drive there. That sounds quaint at this point. That sounds nice. But this, I'm just sitting in my house and I'm pulling to refresh and I'm utilizing an app that's specifically, probably, let's be honest, designed to addict me. That's the point of it.
You're 100% correct. That is the point of it, to addict you. And we've talked about this over the past 40 years in working on this issue. And obviously I haven't been working on it for 40 years because I met Dave in the summer of 2001. And right before that is when I had my change on the issue. But it's not like drugs and alcohol in the sense that this addiction can be limitless monetary. And what I mean by that is if you spend $50,000 drunk or high, someone notices, someone sees it. When gambling addictions come to the forefront, they become known usually because someone has reached the end of the rope. They've accessed every line of credit they can. They've stolen from everyone they can to get away with it. And then all of a sudden, that's when it comes to light. And when it comes to light, it's not like, hey, so-and-so, had a blackout night. No, so-and-so may have lost six figures. They may be down $100,000 because of all the places they could obtain credit. That's what is and can be scary about gambling, especially when it's at your fingertips. And these gambling industry marketers, the way they do things, when you look at sports gambling, they can limit how much you wager. They limit the people that win, but they never limit the people that lose. That's always the interesting thing. The people that, there's a very small percentage that can do this for a living. Very, very, very small. And they're limited on what they're allowed to do.
So let's talk about the rate of addiction through the casino campaigns. And this is, again, these campaigns began prior to the cell phone, prior to the smartphone. So when the statistical data was being accumulated on how many people were at risk of becoming gambling addicts in the country, back when you either had to drive to Vegas or Atlantic City or to limited access sites on these riverboats, that number was running in the 5% zone. Based on surveys and sociologists and psychologists, they projected that about 5% of the population was prone, at risk of becoming gambling addicts. Now, they would use terms like problem or pathological, but look, they're open targets, open season. So if you run the math on 280 million adults, let's see, 28 million to be 10%. So there's a 14 million potential adult number that is scientifically, as best we can determine, at risk. You've got 14 million potential addicts out there. And how many do you need to capture to be highly profitable in a gambling enterprise? Because they're out there. Now, the other thing that the research showed is that the more availability that you had to convenience gambling, obviously that number would rise. But these studies were done, the baseline on these studies was done before the smartphone and the cell phone. Now, if we were to run those same statistics, and I don't know that they're out there yet, we're going to keep looking to see if someone has run more current research. Given the technological advances that we have, you've got to know that 5% number is bigger. It's clearly bigger.
Because now you don't even have to be prone to being addicted to gambling. You just have to be prone to being addicted to a phone.
Point
and who
well
among
taken,
us
Alan.
wouldn't raise their hand and say, yeah, I probably spend too much time on my phone.
Point very well taken. And so let's now consider, we'll stay in the Stone Age. Let's stay with the 5% factor. You've got a behavior that 5% of the people are going to get hooked on. And that being hooked on that means that there's an industry that will not release their claws on this person until that person is completely bankrupt. And even then, they'll be sending them information. If they could send them stuff in jail, they'd do so. And we know that a person who is a problem gambler is likely to lose everything. A person who's a pathological gambler will lose everything and start to take stuff from other people. These are very serious problems. 5% of your state. Now, how can any lawmaker, regardless of their political party or religious philosophy or anything, how can anyone claiming to be a public servant sent to represent people for the common good embrace as a state enterprise a behavior that they know will destroy 5% of their population?
That's a great question, and one that we need to be asking the lawmakers. We're in the process of setting meetings up with folks that are on this committee so we can have these discussions with them. The other thing, Dave, as it pertains to the 5%, is in the state of Ohio, and I'm sure in many other states, I want to see the numbers of lottery sales in certain zip codes. I want to see what lottery sales look like per capita to income. Because what is happening in these states is, unfortunately, the poorest zip codes are spending the most amount of money per capita on lottery tickets. You don't see thriving cities that say, oh, we make a lot of money. No, the lottery, the state in essence, is selling that's their chance to get out. They're preying on their most vulnerable. That's not the role of government. It frustrates me to no end every time you're in an inner city and you see that billboard in neighborhoods and you're like, no, this isn't the way out.
So let's talk about a pathway out. Obviously, there's going to come a time when enough abuse and enough theft and enough death is going to permeate the culture on this, and people will respond and they'll throw these politicians out of office. But it takes a lot to do that because they buy so many people. The gambling industry owns so many people. That's a challenge. It is the legislative remedy and the ballot remedy is essential. And so finding politicians to run for public office that will stand against the lottery industry and the gambling industry is important. That's still pretty tough to do. In the meantime, We got to do it. But in the meantime, why not fight at two levels? Why not fight at the same time in both industry, in both ways? Why not take the reality of the destroyed lives and make the industry pay for it? They're doing it. They're doing it intentionally. We know they're doing it intentionally. They've admitted to us in public that they're doing it intentionally, that they have an addicted class of people that they work on. Why not begin liability litigation against the industry for what they're doing? You say, well, you can't sue the state. Well, wait a minute. We sued the Lottery Commission, and we won. Now, and we got standing in court, and we won in a major suit in the Midwest. Now, in that same state, we came back with a second suit years later, and given the influence of the gambling industry, we were thrown out after 3 years of litigation for not having standing, when we had won in that very same state a few years ago in a very similar suit. So the industry is pervasive. They can even get judges. They can even get to judges. So I'm not saying this is going to be easy. But what would happen if the people who care for so many, the issues of child trafficking, very important, of child abuse, very important, foster care, what would happen if the people who have compassion for their neighbors in regards to public policy would begin to litigate against the corruption of the gambling industry and attempt to hold them accountable for the destroyed lives? What would that do to the political process?
You mentioned those court cases. I just read the Legislative Service Commission analysis of the pending legislation in Ohio, and Walgate v. Kasich is cited and the sponsor during testimony, and that was the case that we put against former Governor John Kasich for his expansion of gambling. And the sponsor talked about the fact that the courts did not decide against the way legislature has expanded gambling through the years, and he cited that case. The problem is, when you read the case, we were thrown out on standing. They did not win
on the merits.
No, they didn't win any part of the case. So once again, deception and moving go hand in hand with this type of legislation.
And now, a musical excerpt from Christmas in America, 1973.
Well, the south side of Chicago is the baddest part of town. And if you go down there, you better just be aware. Man named Leroy Brown. Now Leroy, more than trouble. You see, he's standing about 6 foot tall. At the downtown lane, he's gone with treetop love. All the men just call him sir. He was bad, Leroy Brown. Baddest man in the whole dang town. Man of that old King Kong. Meaner than a junkyard dog. Now Leroy, he a gambler. And he like his fancy clothes. He like to wear a diamond ring. He thought everybody knows. He got a custom Continental. He got an Eldorado too. He got a 32 gun in his pocket for fun. He got the waves in his shoe. And he's bad, Leroy Brown. Baddest man in the whole dang town. Better than old King Kong. Leaner than a junkyard dog. Well, Friday, about a week ago, Leroy was shooting dice. And he did to the bar, said a girl named Doris. You know that girl looked nice. When he cast his eye upon him, and the trouble soon began. And Leroy Brown learned a lesson by messing with the wife of a dead man. And he's bad, Leroy Brown. Baddest man in the whole dang town. Better than old King Kong. Meaner than a junkyard dog. Well, the two men took to fighting. And when they pulled them from the floor, Leroy looked looked like a jigsaw puzzle with a couple of pieces gone. And it's bad, bad, Leroy Brown, baddest man in the whole dang town, badder than an old King Kong, meaner than a junkyard dog. Yeah, and it was bad, bad, Leroy Brown, baddest man in the whole dang town, badder than an old King Kong, meaner than a junkyard dog. Yeah, he was badder than an old King Kong, meaner than a junkyard dog.
To hear more, visit thepublicsquare.com. The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.